Anyway, let's get started. So I'm so glad to have everyone joining us this afternoon for what is finally, I guess, our last session, our last extension session that was complementing our three-part series from June on building inclusive teams. If you were with us in June or at our previous extension sessions in September or November, welcome back. We're so glad to have you back. If this is your first time joining us for this series, you maybe just happen to come across it, we're really glad you're here. And I'll show you in just a moment where you can access all the materials and the recordings from our previous sessions. So my name is Ashley Quick, and I've been with Public Consulting Group for almost 4 years now. Before that, I was a special education teacher for 10 years, but now I spend most of my time coaching teachers through Project Success, which is a resource center that's funded by the Indiana Department of Education, and we provide professional development to teachers of students with significant disabilities. And if you've seen any of our presentations before, you know our team loves to show off our families. So this is a picture from a recent beach getaway with my husband, Tony, and our 9-year-old twins, Aaliyah and Jackson. Those are the two who may be making guest appearances here. And I wanted to share with you the rest of our team too. So whether you're brand new to Project Success or you've worked with us before, I just wanted you to be able to put names with faces for the members of our team. Again, I'm Ashley Quick, and I'm joined on the team by our director, Meredith Keaty Merck, project advisor, Amy Howie, subject matter expert, Heidi Brett Baker, project specialist, Mary Baker Budisa, and project manager, Christine Krieger. You can feel free to reach out to any one of us with questions. All of our contact information is here. For those of you who aren't familiar, I just wanted to give you the briefest of introductions to what Project Success truly does. As I mentioned, we're a statewide resource center that's funded by our Department of Education, and our main goal is to support educators of students with significant intellectual disabilities. We provide professional development at no cost across really a variety of topics that you can see here on this slide. And in the past, we also provided it in a variety of formats, although primarily these days we're still in virtual mode here. As a side note, you'll occasionally hear me refer to intellectual disabilities and cognitive disabilities interchangeably. Different laws use different terms, but we're referring to the same students either way. And also, I guess I should say too, although our team is viewing many things through the lens of students with more significant needs, the content of this training series really is applicable to the inclusion of all students with disabilities. Last bit here, just wanted to share the bigger picture of our family of resource centers. We're part of the Indiana Resource Network, and each of those resource centers, those icons that you see there, have their own specialties. They're either partially or fully funded by the Indiana Department of Education. And you can find out more either by going to that link. Each icon will take you directly to the resource center, and you'll be able to access more descriptive information about what each of those resource centers does for our schools here in Indiana. But we're happy to be part of that larger network supporting students with disabilities. Our website for Project Success is projectsuccessindiana.com. The Indiana part is important, especially if you're Googling, because there are some other random project successes out there. If you click on the resources tab in the upper right-hand corner, you'll be able to access all of our guidance documents, templates, just any kinds of information that we have out there for educators and administrators. If you click on the events tab from our homepage, you'll be able to access recorded webinars, previous regional training presentations that we've done. This is also where you'll be able to access the recordings and the resources from our previous Summer Institute sessions as well. So you'll go to the Events tab, select Conferences, and then you'll select Summer Institute 2020 from that Regional Trainings drop-down menu and click Go. That will take you to the page that has all the recordings, all the resources from all of our Summer Institute 2020 sessions. I also pulled together just a summary of some of those things, kind of the highlights, and put them on this slide here. The facilitator guides that you see here were developed to go along with each of the 3 original sessions from last June. If you'd like to work through this inclusive teams process with a team on your own, in your own building or your own district. So those facilitator guides will help walk you through the content of those first 3 sessions from June. Just as a side note too, I'm not sure if I mentioned, everyone will be receiving a copy of these slides that I'm going over today, so you'll be able to access any of the links that you see in the presentation that way. All right. So for today, here's what I'm hoping to accomplish. I want to start by just reviewing the inclusive practices framework that our entire summer series has been built on, just to kind of level set, get our minds back in the frame really of thinking about inclusive practices, whether you're new to us, filling you in on that, or whether you're a returning participant, just remembering what does that framework look like. And then I'm going to zero in on one particular element of that framework, which is the reflecting, the analyzing, and the adjusting piece of the framework. That's sort of the season that we're in right now. And then as we near the end of our session today, I'll discuss how to prepare for the upcoming school year, and I'll also share some upcoming professional development opportunities. You notice a Navy speech bubble up there in the right-hand corner. That's an indication that I'll be inviting you to discuss or share your thoughts on a particular question or topic. So feel free to share your thoughts in the chat box then, or really anytime. We have several of the Project Success team members on monitoring the chat box for me. And so they'll pop in and make sure that I see any pertinent comments if I'm just on a roll. But truly, we really appreciate your engagement and your interaction. And so please don't hesitate to share your thoughts. Really at any time, but especially when you see those Navy speech bubbles. The objectives for today align right with the agenda. We want you to be able to just review the elements within that inclusive practices framework. We want you to especially hone in on the reflecting, analyzing, and adjusting piece regarding your own inclusive action plans if you've been with us before and have developed an action plan. And then identify ways that you can prepare for continuing or maybe starting the implementation of inclusive practices during the upcoming school year. So here we go. As a reminder, this is our inclusive practices framework. It's what we've based this whole training series on. And it starts off with establishing the need for change. That's the critical first step. If there's not a belief that something needs to change with regard to inclusive practices, then nothing will change. So it really comes down to, in order for a student to receive a free and appropriate public education, FAPE, right? We all know about FAPE, as required by law, that student must be involved in and making progress in the general education curriculum. That's our whole basis for focusing on the implementation or the increasing of inclusive practices in our schools. So once you've established that need for change, the next step is to gather a group of people who are committed to this journey of implementing or expanding inclusive practices. The first task for your inclusive team will be to create and share a vision of what inclusive practices will look like in your school or district. Then you move on to take action. That stage of the framework is where you do a lot. That's a really loaded step in the framework. You're going to assess your current practices. You're going to review various inclusive strategies that you'd like to implement, and then you'll create your action plan for moving forward. Once you've sort of put that plan into place and taken some action, you'll move on to being on the lookout for securing small wins and really celebrating progress toward your vision. And then that second to last step of reflecting, analyzing, and adjusting, that's really actually going to take place several times throughout the process of implementing inclusive practices. As I mentioned earlier, that's sort of a season we might be in right now as we're unbelievably sort of starting to coast near the end of a school year. We're in that downhill stretch. So it's time to be reflecting and analyzing and perhaps adjusting or at least planning for what we might do next year. And then finally, all of this within the framework is heading toward setting inclusive practices as the norm in your school or your district. There's a link that will take you directly to the inclusive practices framework at the bottom of this slide. And now, I mentioned earlier that today our discussion is pretty much going to align with this particular step, the reflecting and analyzing and adjusting. And in my mind, sort of the unofficial theme of today's session is inclusive practices, expectations versus reality. We've had near a full year, if you've been with us since June, for working your way through the framework, implementing those different steps. And so it's really now a time where we can be thinking about what has gone well, what could we maybe let go for now, and what is something we might replace it with, what is something we might do differently. So that's really, I feel like, the season that many of us are in regarding the implementation of inclusive practices. even if you're here for the first time, joining us for the first time, we'd still love to hear your perspective on sort of just your own personal expectations for inclusive practices versus any reality that you may have encountered. So you'll notice here, the Navy speech bubble is here. I'm curious to hear from you now. What were your expectations starting out in this process, those of you who have been with us before? And as you started implementing those steps in the framework, what were your expectations like? And then what has your reality been? And maybe how big is the gap between the two? So I'll give you guys a moment to think about that. I know that's a lot. Those are a lot of loaded questions all at once. So if you've been with us before, what were your expectations in the beginning? What did you think it would be like implementing this framework? And then what was your reality after you actually got into it for a while? How big was that gap? And again, if this is your first time joining us, or you weren't able to fully implement the framework, I'd still be curious to hear, when you think about inclusive practices, you have some expectations that might come to mind. This is what I think it looks like to be, implementing inclusive practices in my classroom or in my school or in my district. What are some of those expectations you would have? And then what's the reality that you've run into, positive or negative, in alignment with your expectations or not? Just curious to hear from you all, and really get your perspective on that. If you'd prefer to unmute at this point, I'm fine with that too. If it's too much trouble to type everything in the chat box, please feel free to unmute as well.
I'm going to unmute and say something.
Sure.
My expectations at the beginning of the year, I was all gung-ho. I was super excited. I was finding teachers to start getting our most severe kiddos into classrooms and everything. And reality more was, well, COVID hit, and then lots of quarantining hit. And so we couldn't quite get the teachers trained and things implemented and whatnot. And then by the time we were able to get everything on going, I thought I had 100% administration on board, but I think administration was more nervous about how it was going to look, how it was going to impact, also concerned with, again, COVID and too many things to worry about. So we're going to put inclusion on the side. But after talking with them and having more meetings, we're back on track. So a little bit slower than I expected, but we're getting there.
Sure. That makes sense. Thank you, Mandy, for sharing that. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure there are a lot of other people on the call today that probably feel similarly. If you remember, you might remember, if you joined us in June, anyone that, our original plan was that this was going to be an in-person institute. That's how we do, all of our regional trainings. But that was one of the first sort of casualties of COVID hitting and everything shutting down, is that we had to turn this virtual. The unexpected bright side of that then was that we've been able to reach so many more people within Indiana and outside of Indiana to be sharing this with you and hearing from you. So, but I totally hear you on the fact that a pandemic just basically threw our world, for a loop, several loops. And so everyone was just pretty much trying to hold on at that point. Never mind, wow, perhaps engaging in this new venture of trying to implement or maybe increase inclusive practices in that way. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing. And I'm so glad to hear that it sounds like maybe we're going to be starting to move back in that direction. I would say too, I think that is often a frustration just in general, in our work with students with more significant needs, in our work with, trying to get administrators on board with various things. It just in general, when things aren't going along as quickly as we would hope, it's hard, we feel impatient about it and we want things to keep going, let's go. But don't let that stop you, right? Don't let that, make you throw your hands up in the air and give up, because it's really important work that you're doing in pursuing those inclusive practices, and it's going to be so worth it in the end. So thank you again, Mandy, for sharing. If anyone else would like to unmute and share, I'm more than willing to give you that time, or we can keep going.
I'll share, Ashley, if you don't mind.
Sure, I'd love to hear. Hey, Jenny.
Hi. So when we first started this in my district, I will admit, I knew it was going to be a hard task. I knew it was a whole mindset shift for the district. to think about making our classrooms ready for kids instead of kids ready for classrooms. And so, you know, that piece, as soon as I got my team to really grab onto it, knowing that it was what we needed to do, and as soon as I got my district level administration on board with this is what we need to do, and then as we really worked with each principal to understand what needed to happen, I just really feel like we made a lot of progress. And I was a little discouraged at first because we had so much pushback, but we just kept using the language of they have a right to be there. They are general ed students first. And the more we repeated those statements, I was hearing other people use those statements. And I was hearing, you know, the shared language was getting passed along.
Yeah.
And I just have some super exciting news to share, is that our LRE data is actually within state targets now. So
that's awesome.
So it's paid off.
That's great. So more administratively, that's a great accomplishment, right? And then thinking about what that truly means for kids, right? That more of them are out in that gen ed setting, getting those experiences with peers and all of that. On all fronts, I would call that a huge win. That's awesome.
Well, and we're way ahead of my schedule. I wasn't thinking we would make it till next year, and we just this past couple months have been within our target. So
I love it.
I'm excited.
I love it. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you for sharing that, Jenny. And I'm over here like trying to take notes. I really like the way you said it, getting classrooms ready for kids rather than getting kids ready for classrooms, right? That's what you said. I love that. That's everything in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
Rather than farming kids out to a particular program because of how they are, how can we change the environment around them that meets their needs, because they do deserve to be in the general education setting truly as much as possible. So
well, and like I said, I owe a lot to Project Success for the help along the way. So thank you.
We're so glad. We're so glad to help you. Thank you, Jenny, for sharing that. All right. Anyone else want to share either their expectations, their reality, anything along those lines with just thinking about inclusive practices in that way?
Julie shared in the chat box, Ashley.
Oh, good. Thank you for. We had to step back and realize we need to let the students drive inclusion and not the adults. Wow, that's another great way of putting it, right? It's not up to us really. It's what the students need, and so we just sort of have to be intentional about arranging the environment in such a way that we're giving them what they need. Absolutely. Not saying, hold on, I'm not ready for you to be included yet. I mean, that's not your decision, you know, like get on it. That's great. That's great. I love hearing this. Thank you guys so much for sharing. Any other, yep.
I'll share. For us, I think my expectation starting out was that all of my SPED teachers would be on board and super excited about this. And they've actually been some of the more, I've had some that have been very resistant.
Yeah.
And very program driven. And so we've kind of had to step back and take a look at philosophy and that. But yeah, I wasn't expecting that, but.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. And I don't know, you know, I don't know what does that exactly. But yeah, we find that often that it's the special ed teachers, you know, we tend to get very protective of our students, and we're the ones who know what's best for them. And oh my gosh, we don't want to stress them out or put them in a situation that's beyond what they're ready for or whatever. But you know, you never know unless you try, kind of a thing, right? So yeah, and to your point about kind of just going back to the data piece too, right, is important as well. So I don't think you can overestimate the importance of the that first step in the framework of establishing the need for change. This isn't just a random, you know, decision that someone pulled out of the air, or, you know, an administrator who's on a power trip and wants to make some crazy changes. There is a need for change, right? It's out there in the research. It's out there in just the collection of best practices. And truly seeing students that are included and have been included and what their outcomes are like, that's what we're looking at. That's establishing the need for change. So yes, really good point, Kiera. And to anyone who may be in a similar situation, I would say, if you need to go back to that first step in the framework of establishing the need for change, go back to it. And to Jenny's point, you know, continue using that language about preparing classrooms for kids, not kids for classrooms, and all students are gen ed students and all of these things. Keep using that language because that's laying, you know, a foundation, I guess, that will eventually get built on and kind of move you forward. Really, really great to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for sharing that. Anyone else wanting to share their experiences, their expectations, their reality? Okay. Feel free to share in the chat box as well. If something pops into mind that you want to make sure we see, go ahead and put that in the chat box, but we can kind of keep moving forward here. So as we're thinking about all the things that go into implementing inclusive practices, I wanted to sort of just present this as like a little tidbit for thought. So often in education, we feel overwhelmed by all the things, right, that have to get done. Lesson planning, grading, calling parents, addressing behavioral challenges, progress monitoring IEP goals, attending or leading the case conferences. There's so many things that we have to worry about getting done all the time. And so sometimes it may feel like implementing inclusive practices is another one of those things that maybe you feel like you don't have time for, right? How am I going to add that to my plate? And so when I came across this question or the way this was phrased here, it really opened my eyes to sort of a different way of thinking about how we can get things accomplished. So what can you eliminate in order to make room for change? So rather than piling everything on top, what can you eliminate to make room for the change that you're really trying to get at? Maybe, you know, maybe right now it's that you just can't see how you're going to fit in inclusive practices with all these other things that you're responsible for. So think about it as pulling weeds, you know, before you're planting the flowers, right? Consider what some things have popped up maybe over the course of this school year, maybe across multiple school years, things that you've taken on or you've had to deal with just because you don't really have time to think about it one way or the other. You just, yeah, okay, I'll do it. Okay, yeah. But those things are really starting to become something that is kind of eats away from the time that you have available to really be implementing these core evidence-based inclusive practices. Those are your weeds, right? Things that just get piled on and you almost don't even notice. And yes, I'll do that. Okay, I'll do that. And then, well, we better do this because we've always done that. Think about it, and I didn't put a speech bubble on this slide because I know that that could be a little raw to think about some of those things and sharing them out loud, but truly think about it. What would some weeds be for you, either as an individual teacher or as an administrator, if there are some weeds that you could clear for your teachers? Think about what some weeds would be that you could perhaps clear or pull to make room for, you know, your ability to plant more inclusive practices. So just some food for thought. Any thoughts on that? I will not make you share your weeds, but are there any thoughts on that in general that you'd like to share before we move on? Jenny's saying common planning and PLCs. Those I would say are, so are you saying those are weeds or are those flowers? Jenny, I'm worried. Flowers, okay, good. I was worried that you felt common planning was a weed. Yeah, of course. Common planning and PLCs for sure. Those would be flowers that you would be planting that would be supporting the inclusive practices. Absolutely. What else? What else? I'm going to mute here for just a second, but keep thinking.
Hey Ashley, this is Meredith. One of Jenny's weeds was talking a little bit about master schedules there in the chat box.
Oh, yes. Really good point. A lot of times master schedules just seem to be baked into, you know, whatever decisions we're making, like, well, that's the master schedule, and so this is what we have to deal with. But somebody out there has the authority to be changing that master schedule and making it more sort of open and accessible to being able to do different things. So yeah, really good point. Really good point. All right, let's keep going here. keep sharing in the chat box if anything else comes to mind. Typed in the wrong space. No worries, Kathy. I was just wondering what a MAPE was, but no worries. Ooh, I see detailed in-class support entries documentation. I could see that one going either way. Is that a weed or is that a flower? Leave a moment to find out. All right. Thank you for your patience while I'm muting and hiding for a moment and coming back. Hopefully we're good now. So here's what I wanted to think about now. In thinking about all the things that we do, and feeling like often, and a couple of you alluded to this earlier, that you wanted to get, you were gung-ho and you're going to do it and it's this big thing and it's going to be awesome, and then it kind of like fizzles out, or whatever happens. I think it's important to point out here that little things count when we're talking about implementing inclusive practices. As it says here, every action, every communication, every little event or thing that you do is a drop in the inclusive practices bucket. And so those drops add up, right? I think it's important to remember that, what you do, and to Jenny's point, using that language over and over again, what you say, that's setting an example for other people. You never know what seeds you might be planting that will sprout and bloom further down the road. And Jenny, had a great example of that she's continuing to consistently use that language. Now she's starting to hear other people use the language. So really setting an example for others. And that is something that might seem like a little thing, but that counts, and that counts in a big way. Those are big drops in the bucket. So to summarize that idea, really, it's not about sort of one big moment, one big decision. We're implementing inclusive practices, here we go. It's about one small action after another, and then all of that is really what is truly bringing about lasting change, right? Because when you're able to do it in smaller chunks and with smaller pieces, oftentimes that will make it more sustainable too, right? Sometimes when something is so big and different, you might be running on adrenaline for a little bit and keep it going, but then at some point it just sort of breaks down. So don't be discouraged, I guess, if your big, grand plan isn't working out the way you'd like. Every little thing, all these drops in the bucket really do add up. So again, here's the Navy speech bubble again. I want to hear from you guys what have been some of your drops in the bucket this school year, whether you've been with us all along implementing your plan, whether you're just now joining us, just what have some of those small things been? Because, and this is a part of, I would say, securing small wins in a way, right? That stage of our framework where you got to recognize those little things. That's a small win that adds up. So tell me, what have some of your drops in the bucket been this year? Or what drops do you plan to collect or look forward to collecting in your bucket moving forward? I know it's asking a lot to think back across a whole school year already, but really this is meant to be sort of calling out to you, what are some things that I maybe overlooked the first time that, okay, now that I think about it again, that action, that event, that conversation was actually a little drop in my bucket that I'm going to keep adding to, that I'm going to keep collecting. So, Jenny says no more specials. Thank you. There is no reason why our students with disabilities can't join a specials class, right? Art, the related arts, right? Art and music and PE and things. We do not need to have a specials. They can be joining the regular specials. That is a big drop. Kiera had over 50 teachers apply to join an inclusive practices committee focused on improving district practices. That's amazing. Kiera, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd love to hear more about that committee and how it came to be and
Yeah, well, it really came from teachers or actually staff feeling like they didn't have a lot of input in decisions that were being made. And also, I know that within our district, we need a philosophy change. And I know that just my department alone can't do it. We have about 4,000 special education students. So I was trying to think of ways how I could have kind of some people on the ground cheering us on and spreading the message. And so I came up with this committee, and we have representatives from all grade levels, gen ed, sped. I have a high school theater teacher who, come to find out at the first meeting, didn't know anything about special education because he's never had students in his class. And then we have administrators involved, and it started off kind of as a planning, and it's really turned into a philosophy, some philosophy opportunities and training, really just people who want to engage. And so I can teach them and give them all the information, and then they go back to their campuses and kind of spread the message. And it's been really awesome.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, that's so great. Yeah, Meredith said there in the chat, that's a powerful example. That's exactly right. I love, and that really, I mean, that is sort of illustrating a lot of the stages in our framework, right? First, you just got to gather a group who's going to go off on this journey together. And then sort of as you're implementing and having these successes, you can bring more people along with you. I love that it's turning into both sort of philosophy, but also bringing in the training piece. Like it's sort of evolving and it's working, right? I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Any other drops anyone wants to share before we move forward? Julie is sharing growing our inclusive practices to the upper grades. Okay, so you've got it going in the lower grades. We're going to grow them up to the upper grades. You've had more teachers willing to step up and be a part of our inclusive team. So many people will be skeptical at first, but once they see a little bit of success in it, they're like, oh, okay, I might be able to get on board with that, right? But that initial sort of, oh, I don't know about all that. It can keep a lot of people on the sidelines. But that's again why we talk about securing the small wins, getting those drops, because those little things add up and slowly people will start to be more okay with things like that. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Julie. Very cool. All right. Thank you for your patience, everyone. If I seem a little scattered, it's because I am. I have a little one in the background here who's really trying his best to get all of my attention. So thank you for being patient with me. Let's keep going. I want to show you this cool poster I found, it's a graphic, and I think you could probably print it off as like a poster size thing. This is by Brooks Publishing, and it really is like a laundry list of drops in the bucket. Listen to me. For students, these would be drops in a student's bucket, right? Listen to me. Ask me questions, expect that I will learn, facilitate friendships, let me learn with other students, redirect softly, challenge me, be positive. All of these things to me, when I saw this, I thought, this goes so well, with everything that we're talking about today, that those are seemingly small things in a particular moment that will add up, right? That will collect in our bucket. So the link that is on this slide, if you follow that link, it's available as a free PDF on the Brooks Publishing website, if that's something that you'd be interested in hanging on to for yourself. But I just found this, I just loved how well it fit into the things that we're talking about today. So I wanted to share that resource with you. All right, and so now, just sort of given everything we've been talking about so far, the reflecting, the analyzing, the adjusting, thinking about pulling weeds, identifying what your weeds are and pulling them, what kind of flowers you might want to be planting, collecting drops in our buckets, all of those things. How do you want to utilize your summer to plan for next school year in terms of implementing or increasing inclusive practices? This is a big old Navy speech bubble, so I want to hear from you. Either unmute or share in the chat box. Think about, what you're thinking about. How am I going to use really any time up through next school year, but thinking of summer as a big block of time. How are you going to plan for next school year in terms of implementing or increasing inclusive practices? And we'll chat about it a little bit, and then I'll have some additional sort of thoughts and resources to share and kind of bolster what you might do in that planning process. So what are you thinking? Whether you've been doing it all year and now you're going to move next level, or whether you've kind of had it rolling around in your brain, but you haven't, jumped all the way into it yet. maybe this is your first time joining us and hearing about a lot of this, but you're getting a little inkling of what you might want to do next. What do you see as your next steps or planning for next year? Maybe this is in a dream world. Maybe you don't know if it will actually happen, but you would love it if you could use your summer to plan how, in what way. I imagine, you know, the inclusive practices committees or the teams that you all have already developed, potentially playing a role in that, right? What might those committees or teams be doing this summer to be building on what you've already done? Marcia is sharing about developing a training for paraprofessionals. It's almost like I paid you to say that, Marcia. Stay tuned and you will see. I have some information to share about paraprofessionals. Yeah, that's great because they're a critical role in the success of inclusive practices, right? I mean, they're in a lot of ways some glue that holds a lot of that together. So if we send them in there untrained, we're really doing a disservice. So yeah, I love that. Love that. Jenny says, keeping your focus on inclusion, but shifting to specially designed instruction in general education next year. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's sort of like a niche area or a niche kind of topic, thinking about, yeah, we're still wanting our students included, but now how are we going to make that SDI appear in gen ed? Doesn't have to be in a special setting, in a segregated setting. How can you get that SDI going in gen ed? That's awesome.
Ashley, this is Julie and Julie. Some things, well, we've already kind of started thinking about next year now, because once summer gets rolling, people have already, now they're thinking vacations and
that's true.
Yeah, so we've already been thinking about what we want for next year. One of our big things is like, because COVID hit, we had to kind of pull away from small groups like we were doing the year before that. So we really want to sit down and try to come up with what is our outcome for each small group, like each level of math that we're working on. What do we want to accomplish with those kiddos? And it's not necessarily, students with disabilities that are in those small groups. It could be higher, like gifted and talented kiddos in those groups. But that's a big one for us. And then another one that Julie and I did last summer, and I think we got as much fun of it as the kids did. We went on a road trip and we ventured to every kid's house one day. We took them popcorn. It wasn't like it was, but the power that gave us in one day, aside from getting lost and going to Ohio instead of staying in Indiana.
Well,
it was
for a good story.
The parents got to meet us because open houses and stuff were not the same this year, but the parents got to meet us, see us together. The kids got to meet us on their turf.
Sure.
And so now we've decided that's a must. We have to go on the road again next summer. So that's already on the docket for this summer.
That immediate connection, it was powerful.
I love that so much. I hope that I can remember that long enough to write it down and share it with other people. What a great way to connect with your students. And I love what you said about meeting them on their own turf, right? That can be big for some of our students that might have, some anxieties about school and all of that, and seeing you together. So for those of you that don't know, our Julie and Julie ×2 there, they're a wonderful co-teaching duo in Indiana. So that's awesome for them to see the both of you just as, this is who we are, right? We are a pair. This is us. Yep. Here we are. That's awesome. Meredith said it's not a road trip until you're slightly lost. So
that's true.
Just perfectly. Checked all the boxes on that one. What fun. I love that. I love that. What else people were saying? Let's see. Our committee is prioritizing PD and brainstorming ways to train gen ed teachers. Absolutely. The work that we do here in Indiana, we've gotten to a point here now where so many of our special ed teachers that we work with are like, yep, we get it. We're on board, but what about the gen ed teachers? Like we're very much in a place oftentimes where we're preaching to the choir, right? Like, yeah, we get it, but how can we bring our gen ed peers on board, or sometimes administrators, right? How can we get them on board? So I hear that 100%, and I love that. It's not unreasonable to want to train our gen ed teachers, because I would have a lot of, fears and anxieties if I didn't have a clue what was going on, or I felt uninformed or unprepared to deal with whatever it is you're suggesting to me. So absolutely finding ways to meet that need for training gen ed is going to be a big piece. Lashandra is saying district level rollout plan for levels of implementation to support all key stakeholders in the inclusion or co-teach setting. I love that. So you're going to have a pilot school approach. Yeah. I mean, one thing at a time, right? The drops in the bucket, secure small wins. Start with a pilot school and then expand based on the successes that you have there. That's great. I love that. Yeah, really good point. I don't know, maybe I'm just out of education world, but in my mind, summer's a great time to plan. But Julie, you're like, people are going on vacation in the summer. We're trying to figure out what we're doing now. That's what I mean, right? Let's talk about that. What are you going to do now? What are you planning to do now, shortly, maybe over the summer? What else? Anyone else have things they want to share about how they're getting ready for next year? I will say, I'll give you, think about it and share, either feel free to unmute, put it in the chat box, but I will move on and show you just a few things, that are our suggestions for ways that you could be thinking about moving forward. So these are all items that came from our original Summer Institute series in June. If you remember, if you were there, back that far, we had an inclusive practices self-assessment, which was really one of the beginning stages of getting into all that content that we discussed last summer, was just where are you at as an individual with inclusive practices. So maybe that's something you can maybe you've completed it before, maybe you want to complete it again and see if anything's changed, how things have adapted, evolved over this year. Or if you haven't been with us before, that would be a great place to start and just kind of get your feet wet with thinking about some inclusive practices. Also, you might want to then move on to the step of identifying one or more colleagues to bring along with you on this inclusive practices road trip, if you're Julie and Julie. If you've already got a team established, who else can you add to that team, right? Because we're wanting to bring everyone along eventually so that we're able to set it as a norm. But if this is your first go at it and you're gung-ho about it, find, one or two other friends that you might be able to bring alongside you. It does not have to be a big team right off the bat. But this link here will take you to one of the templates that we shared in June about building an inclusive team. Who do you want to consider to be on that team and all of that? Then you might want to consider assessing your current practices, and that's more at like a school level or maybe even a district level. That's another template that we have for you where you can think about, okay, what are we doing currently? And then how do we want to either change that? Maybe there are some pieces you want to keep and build on. Maybe there are some things you want to get rid of, all of that, right? But you can't really know where you want to go until you have a good idea of where you're at right now. I see my video froze. I really hope my audio didn't freeze. I hope everyone's taking a screenshot of my face right now.
Fine. And your video's back up. So
oh, good.
Crisis averted.
It's not truly a webinar, a Zoom webinar, right? Until your face freezes in a weird position. And lastly, on this slide here, don't forget we have the Inclusive Educator Toolbox. And actually, I'm going to pull that up if I can navigate all my screen sharings appropriately. I want to show you, if you don't remember or you weren't with us, I want to show you the Inclusive Practices Toolbox. It is a Google, I found it. It's a Google Sheet. Can you see the Google Sheet? Yes? No?
Yes. We can.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
Listen, you never know. It could go either way. So this was our Inclusive Educator Toolbox that we developed last summer as a way to get resources pulled together for you for every step of the framework. So you start here, here's the Start Here tab, and it's just explaining to you sort of how to navigate the toolbox. But as you go along the bottom, you'll see this tab is the whole toolbox at once. And you'll see on the left there, we have each stage of the framework, and then going out, we're describing that stage of the framework, and then we break it down by, here's some articles that match that stage of the framework, here's websites or podcasts, whatever, all different kinds of resources we found that sort of align with those different framework stages. That's all kind of in one place. And then And those are sort of the, I would say, like the top resources that we found in each of those stages. And then if that's too much to think about right now and you just want to focus in on what stage you're currently working on, right, establishing the need for change, we have it broken out that way too, where you can just look at that tab and kind of see those key resources. I will say that that's something I'll be looking at updating as well, since this is a shared link. Or I mean, it's a shared document, a Google sheet, so that we can always be updating it. And if you hold on to that link, you'll always have the most updated version of the Inclusive Educator Toolbox. But that is something on my to-do list to be doing for this upcoming summer, is to make sure that we've got really solid resources on there. So if you come across any resources that you'd like to share, please feel free to email me. I'll make sure to share my email address again at the end, but we'd love to hear if you have some good resources for each of those stages. So again, just wanted to remind you that this exists. We tried to make it as digestible as possible and as easily accessible as possible. You know, it does no good to have a list of 40 resources if you have no idea which one might be a good one or which one is only a little bit related to the topic, right? So we really tried to narrow it down to just a handful for each stage of the framework that would help support you in that stage. So just wanted to remind you that that's there. Let me see if I'll be able to find my way back to my PowerPoint. Ta-da! All right. So just to go along with some of that discussion that we were having about how are you going to prepare for next year, wanted to throw out these ideas for you for consideration as things that you might be able to do to prepare for next year. And then sort of closing out the, I would say, content portion of our session today, I really just wanted to say, I hope the message that you've taken away from really all of these sessions that we've had together is that every child is a learner, and there are so many ways that we all can work together to make sure each and every student has full access to their general education content, curriculum, settings, peers, experiences, and the way we do that is through the implementation of inclusive practices. So with that teed up, looking ahead to this summer, our Summer Institute 2020, it was such a success that we're taking it now sort of to the next level with Summer Institute 2021 and really looking at it as inclusive practices in action, right? Last summer was all about looking at the framework, getting everything sort of set up, but now, okay, what is this going to look like in action? So this June, the format will still be virtual as it was last summer, but what we're doing this year is partnering with other resource centers in the Indiana Resource Network, who I was bragging on earlier, as well as expert teachers across the state, perhaps even a couple who are on today, to provide a number of really topic-specific sessions during the course of a single day. So last summer we had 3 trainings. They were, one week and then one the next week and so forth. This summer, we're going to be setting it up as just one day. So for educator sessions, it's going to be June 8th. Then we'll also have some separate sessions for administrators on June 9th. And then later in June, on the 23rd, we're going to have a session that devoted to really just sort of expanding the work from the 2020 series. If you did build a team with us, then we'll look at how to expand that in more depth during that session. This slide has a non-exhaustive list. I will say this is not all of the sessions that we have planned. It's non-exhaustive. More of them will be announced in the coming weeks, but if you want to stay tuned to that and make sure that you're notified when the registration comes up for summer 2021, you can sign up for our newsletter, which is available by clicking on that link or visiting our website and finding PS Did You Know? That's the name of our newsletter. So we want to make sure that we're bringing all of you along with us on this next step of our inclusive practices journey. I think this will be a really neat way to hear from different resource centers, different teachers who have been there, done that, and looking at these topics here as well as other topics and really bringing it all full circle and really expanding, get it. We have an inclusive practices structure in place, or we have the framework in place, but now let's look in more detail about what some of this might look like in action. So that's the goal for summer 2021. I'm super pumped. I hope all of you are able to join us. Don't forget, registration will be available shortly. And if you want sort of the heads up on when that's available, sign up for our newsletter. I think I'm starting to get vibes from my daughter who pretends to be a YouTube star, like and subscribe below and things like that. It's rubbing off. Also, we have so many other upcoming opportunities that I didn't want to close out today without sharing with you. So these are all no-cost opportunities coming up. A week from today, I'll be presenting a session on connecting behavior and academics and sort of the role that behavior as communication plays in that process. You can register on that link and then learn more. There's a flyer linked there. That'll be a week from today. At the end of the month, we'll be hosting our 3rd annual Model Site Summit. And that's where educators who we've selected or who have been selected as model sites within the state of Indiana, they will be discussing their inclusive practices and just sort of sharing their experiences from this year of being a model site. You'll hear from both model site teachers and their administrators, as well as our sort of featured keynote speaker, Dr. Kim Landrum. And you can register to join us virtually using the link that's here. And you can view additional information on the flyer that's also linked here. And then in April, we'll be hosting our first ever teacher leader capstone celebration, where our teacher leaders will be presenting their capstone projects. So that's yet another way that we've been able to work with teachers throughout the school year in a little bit more concentrated way. They've been working all year on a capstone project, and so this event is really going to be a celebration and a sharing of those projects. So there are 2 sessions for that, primary in the morning, secondary in the afternoon. Registration and more information can be found on those links. And then not to leave out our paraprofessional friends. Marcia, was that you who said something about paraprofessionals? Here is some information specifically for paras. We designed a webinar series specifically for paraprofessionals, and we still have a couple of sessions upcoming. So actually tomorrow afternoon, you can join the session on supporting student communication. And then next month, you can join either session. There's an AM and a PM, but it's the same content for learning about data collection. And there are some other topics that we've already had those webinars on, but recordings of those can be accessed on our website, which is that 3rd here link on the slide. So lots of things still to come to help support you in all of this work that you're doing with inclusive practices and otherwise. So I wanted to make sure that I shared all of that with you. Just as a reminder, this is how you can access all of our resources we've been talking about today. That's our website, projectsuccessindiana.com. If you click on events and then go down to conferences, that's how you'll be able to find the information specifically for Summer Institute. But you can also see the upcoming events and get registered there as well. And we have reached the end, and I have 7 whole minutes, you guys. That is maybe a first. So that's exciting. I promised I'd put my email address back up there. So if you have questions, if you have any resources that you'd like considered added to our Inclusive Practices Toolbox, feel free to reach out to me there. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter to stay up to date with our latest PD opportunities. And I'm done. So I'd love to hear any other questions, comments, concerns, thoughts from the group during these last few minutes.